In the world of psychology and education, there's a huge shift happening right under our noses. For so long, we've worked from a model that's all about deficits. But what if that whole model is just wrong? Today, we're going to dig into this massive move from deficit to diversity, a change in thinking that's really shaking up how we understand the human mind.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll break down the traditional core deficit model, the old blueprint. Then we're going to look at the research that's starting to poke some serious holes in it. After that, we'll dive into the neurodiversity paradigm that's taking its place. And finally, we'll get practical and see what this all means for you, the professionals on the ground.
All right, so for decades, our whole approach to things like autism or ADHD has been shaped by one big idea. It's called the core deficit model. And it's basically the framework that has driven everything, from research to diagnosis to the interventions we use. So what is this thing exactly? Well, the name kind of says it all. You've got two parts. The core part is this idea that everyone with a certain diagnosis, say autism, is basically the same in some fundamental way. And the deficit part? That's the assumption that the best way to define these groups is by what they struggle with, by how they deviate from some kind of normal or ideal brain. And this model, well, it sets up a very straight, linear path. You start by identifying that core deficit. That leads you to a diagnosis. The diagnosis then tells you which intervention to use. And for a very long time, the end goal of that intervention was pretty clear: normalization. The aim was to make someone act more like a so-called average person. But here's the thing. That foundation is starting to look really shaky. Researchers are now questioning both of those key assumptions, the core part and the deficit part. And honestly, the evidence they're finding is pretty hard to ignore.
First up, let's talk about that core assumption. There's this new wave of research called transdiagnostic research. And all that means is that scientists are looking for patterns that cut across our neat little diagnostic boxes. And what are they finding? It's messy. When they group people based on, say, their cognitive profiles or their genetics, those groups just don't line up with labels like autism or ADHD. The reality is, overlap is the norm, not these clean, separate categories we thought existed.
Okay, so the core idea is on shaky ground. But what about the deficit part? Let's take a classic example, one we've all heard: the idea that autistic people have an inherent deficit in social communication. But is that really what's going on? Or is there another way to look at it?
Well, check this out. A really clever study looked at this using a setup like the game Chinese Whispers. They passed a story down a chain of people. When the chain was all non-autistic people, the story got through just fine. High information transfer. But here's the kicker. When the chain was made up of all autistic people, the information transfer was also high. It worked just as well. The communication only broke down when the chain was mixed with both autistic and non-autistic people. And this just nails the takeaway, doesn't it? Professor Sue Fletcher-Watson, who led this work, put it perfectly. The so-called impairment isn't actually in the autistic person. It's in the gap, in the mismatch between the two people who are trying to communicate. That is a total game changer. So when you have evidence like that, it doesn't just poke a few holes in the old model. It basically demands a whole new one. If the problem isn't a deficit inside a person, but a mismatch between people, we need a totally different way of thinking. And that's where the neurodiversity paradigm comes in. I absolutely love this way of explaining it, the woodland analogy. Just picture a forest. A woodland that's full of all different kinds of trees. Birch, cherry, willows is way stronger, way more resilient than a boring old monoculture with just one type of tree, right? Each tree has its own needs for sunlight and water, but every single one has value. Neurodiversity says our minds are just like that. Cognitive diversity isn't a problem, it's a natural, valuable, and essential part of what makes us human. So let's break down the core ideas here. 1. Neurodiversity is just a normal, valuable part of human diversity. 2. There is no single right or superior way for a brain to be. 3. We should think about neurodivergence the same way we think about other forms of diversity, like race or gender. And 4. The real strength isn't just in finding a few talented individuals. It's in the diversity of the entire group. And when you put these two paradigms side by side, wow, the difference is just night and day. The old deficit model was all about fixing the person, reducing their deficits. But the neurodiversity paradigm, it flips the script entirely. The goal isn't to change the person at all. It's to change the environment so that person has what they need to thrive. We're moving from fixing people to fitting environments. Okay, so this is a really powerful shift in thinking, but let's get down to brass tacks. What does this actually look like for those of us working in the field? How do we take these big ideas and turn them into something real? Let's look at some principles and projects that are doing just that.
So here are 4 principles you can start using right away. First, expect heterogeneity. People are different, so our services need to be flexible, not one size fits all. Second, reject normalization. Our goal is to improve someone's quality of life, not to change who they fundamentally are. Third, fight stigma. We have to actively work to make society more accepting. And finally, and this is a big one, respect client expertise. The people with lived experience are the experts on their own lives. We need to work with them.
So what does this look like in a school? The Leans project is a perfect example. Instead of pulling a few kids out for special help, it's a curriculum that teaches the entire class about neurodiversity. And the result? You're building empathy and understanding from the ground up. You create an inclusive classroom for everyone, which actually reduces the need for formal labels and singling kids out in the first place. It's proactive, not reactive. And for older students, you've got amazing programs like the Nest Project. This is a peer support group for neurodivergent high schoolers. And it's not about managing deficits. It's about building a positive identity, a sense of community, and even skills for collective advocacy. It helps them see their neurotype not as something to hide, but as a core part of who they are, a strength to be understood and embraced.
So as we wrap this up, it's pretty clear we're in the middle of a major sea change, moving away from a lens of deficit and toward a framework of diversity. So the real question this leaves for all of us isn't if this is happening, but how we can each be a part of it. So I'll leave you with this. How can you start to shift from fixing deficits to affirming diversity in your own work?